Berserk! Enshrined as one of the most esteemed manga of all time, with one of the most repulsive adaptations of all time, it would be hard to ignore this behemoth of graphic literature. While I have read a lot of manga and watched quite a few anime, I've actually not read this legendary series until recently. At first, I hesitated to share any of my thoughts, as I want my videos to be somewhat novel offerings to the collective dialogue instead of merely reiterating what's already been said in a lesser form. And as it is, there are copious amounts of Berserk content on YouTube, especially now, after the most unfortunate and saddening passing of Kentaro Miura. From what I've seen, the news of his death has stimulated interest in his series, and I have personally seen many manga collectors start adding Berserk to their collections and post reviews. This burgeoning gush of content is surely daunting, and personally, I have wrestled with whether or not I should even create Berserk content right now. But I am hoping that perhaps, my takes might still resonate or provide some value, as I will be discussing specific observations and speculations in order to facilitate more of a collaborative discussion here. I'm rather just posting general spoiler-free reviews, which is what I've been seeing. And then also maybe veterans would benefit from viewing details of the series through the lens of a newbie, wide-eyed and mystified, or teary-eyed and traumatized. For the sake of my integrity, I will demonetize this video so I don't receive any profit in case viewers prompted by the news of Miura's death are picking up Berserk and stumbling upon this video. At the time of this video, I have 0 subscribers, but in case this goes unexpectedly viral, I wish to receive absolutely no monetary gain from anything related to his death. And also, with that said, rest in peace, Miura. Thank you so much for your masterpiece. Bell Leona here, and this is the first installment of my journey through Berserk. In this video, we will be going through the first 2 arcs, the Blackswordman Arc and the Golden Age Arc. With that said, there will obviously be spoilers for everything in this arc up to volume 14 in the manga, and also this point. Prior to reading this, I have watched the first Golden Age movie, and I have been spoiled about a few things, such as the climactic and traumatic violation of Miss Casca. So I knew a few things going in, but that's actually quite minimal to what I discovered while reading everything. So first, I must say, this arc and the manga as a whole begins with a bang! Coming in, I was fully aware of this graphic nature, so I wasn't surprised. But on that note, I expected a lot more acts like this. All of the hearsay seemed to present this introductory section as being indulgently chock full of graphic content, even to the point of being too gratuitous. While I acknowledge the presence of some very racy and gruesome scenes, I didn't see too many boundaries being pushed. And honestly, I found the next arc boasts of more gratuitous and disturbing scenes. But with that said, I initially found this arc to blossom from being slightly interesting to being full-grown, interwoven, rich, mystifying narrative. And the characters also grew on me. Now, barrage me with your boos and your dislikes, but I was not a fan of Guts in the first part of the arc. I know. Blasphemy. But I am just generally repelled by jerk-like characters who seem to have minimal redeeming or humanizing qualities. And in the beginning, Guts presents himself as a hardened, misanthropic jerk who belittles the weak. And for me, that is not cool, sympathetic, or appealing in my book. Of note is that many seinen protagonists often begin as ruthless or belligerent punks, like Thorfinn and Musashi. I'll be honest, they were not my favorite characters in the beginning of their series either, so this is just a personal thing. If you like characters like that, then all the power to you. We just have different tastes. However, during the course of the arc, when you catch glimpses of his more vulnerable emotions and see the trauma that has plagued him internally, then that's when I find him to be a lot more humanized and a lot more fleshed out. And I do begin to like him later on. And in retrospect, you can infer why his heart is that swirling pit of darkness that Puck detects once the God Hand appears, but I'll discuss that later. If you do like his introduction, even without the context of his past, and just think that he is epic and just love him at this point, please let me know. I am interested to see different perspectives. Okay. Unfortunately, all the Puck stands are also at liberty to hate on me because I wasn't a fan of him either. Well, I see his purpose as a comic relief, a moral light and foil to Guts, and an audience surrogate. In a very dark tale, I just found his silliness unfunny and tonally jarring at times. Even though I do appreciate, his inspiring and proactive actions as well. So again, if you love or hate Puck in the beginning, please let me know. I am interested to see. And as for the plot, because I don't have much to say about the side characters without context, I was mildly intrigued in the first half. In my opinion, battle with the first apostle, well, technically the second after the lady, was kind of interesting. And even the instance within the caravan and the priest and his daughter, while being intense and tragic, it did not hook me personally. Yet all that changed after the scenario with the Count and Varga. At this point, the narrative thickened and quickened. You see Miura weaving in these parallels, Guts beginning to see pieces of himself with Varga as a kinship soul who's maimed, scarred, hurt, and vengeful instead of just an ugly weakling. And the pulse of Guts' heart seems to throb more strongly as you see that human vulnerability behind his armor of anger and violence. And you see him rage against the machinations of the dead who wish to use him for their own vengeful purposes. And you see him actively change from refusing to avenge Varga to facing the Count on his own terms for himself. And oh, it's just so good. And then on the note of vengeance, you also see what appears to be a parallel between Varga, Guts, and the Count, who becomes a demon to his vengeance, at least until you learn the truth afterwards. And what I loved in this was not only learning more about the fascinating and horrifying lore of the world, but experiencing this parallel storytelling. Because by explicitly explaining the circumstances of the brand of sacrifice in regards to the Count alone, by describing that this invocation of doom requires the supplicant to sacrifice their most cherished person, Miura lets the reader put two and two together. Guts is branded. Griffith/Femto branded him. Therefore, Guts was a dear part of Femto's heart. That, with the brief flashback of Griffith's radiance and character-defining monologue, you start to see that this Birdman demon, who is now the object of Guts' wrath and had once earned Guts' trust and admiration, but for whatever reason sacrificed Guts to fulfill his desire and eventually renounce his humanity. At any point, Miura could have let Puck explain, "Oh, Guts is branded too. Does that mean that Femto must have sacrificed him and they must have had some kind of relationship together or something?" But he doesn't. And I love him for it. And then you also begin to understand why Guts is the way he is. If my comrade, whom I had entrusted my life and heart, suddenly sacrificed me, and as a result, I had to live a life of constantly defending myself against the clutches of demons, I'd be bitter, ireful, wrathful, and calloused too. With that said, I already knew of the nature of their relationship, and I knew of Griffith's violation of Casca, but I did not know about the brand. And also, with that renouncing humanity bit, I instantly thought of Dio from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and thought, oh, maybe there might be some cross-influence going on in the media of manga, as both series started serializing around the same time, JoJo's being in, or Phantom Blood being in 1987, I believe, and Berserk in 1989, I believe. However, according to this interview, it seems like Miura had been experimenting with some of the concepts behind Berserk and had been thinking about them maybe a while before he started even writing the prototype for Berserk. So that's just an interesting observation. Anywho, this arc ended with a fantastic climax and a very thoughtful, very sad resolution, which left me hungering for more and feeling so sad for Guts as he silently cries, injured, defeated, and now having to struggle onward once more. Wow. So the ending of this arc was spectacular in my opinion. Now moving on to the Golden Age. I would say that the Golden Age arc at times shines brilliantly in a solar fashion, providing warmth and wholesomeness at times, while occasionally being obscured by clouds of the sinister and grotesque. Until one point when this illumination is completely eclipsed and everything turns pitch black. Oh my gosh, the WTF factor was so strong with this one. To begin with, this arc obviously starts on a very dark note, and you see the very macabre and tragic beginnings of Guts' life. And oh boy, when I read that scene in which Guts is violated by that hideous sack of perverse flesh, who, to my dismay, I find becomes the first in the line of many hideous sacks of perverse flesh, my heart broke. I wanted to protect Kid Guts at all costs. Oh my gosh. And while I did expect some exploitative sexual content, I did not prepare my heart for the sad feels or the disgust or the outrage or the trauma that I now have to deal with. Oh boy. But with that said, during this arc, I really grew attached to Guts. To see him first be rejected by his father figure and treated like a combat machine, and then to see him eventually, albeit reluctantly, assimilate into the found family of the Band of the Hawks. I was so happy for that progression, and I felt compassion for him as he was haunted by nightmares and visions of his past. And unlike a certain individual, I was so supportive of him as he pursued his own self-actualization in order to find his own dream and become a man worthy of that individual's friendship. And I have seen discussions on the internet on whether Guts was dumb or selfish or whatever for leaving the Band of the Hawks. And I will admit, he may have taken his place in that community for granted, and he may have erred, but I personally don't fault him, and I won't slander his decision, because I too have personally left a group or a situation believing that I would find fulfillment elsewhere until I realized otherwise. And I think that's just a part of most adult lives, unfortunately. I think most people have experienced similar situations and made similar decisions. And then, in this particular case, he was like hyper fixated on becoming good enough for Griffith. It was something that really bothered him. And I will admit, he was very oblivious in underestimating his value to Griffith. But on another note, his romance with Casca felt so natural and wholesome. In fact, that intimate and vulnerable scene between the two was just so beautiful and touching. They were just in this vulnerable and tender nakedness and surrounded by this plush, natural, beautiful environment. And it really seemed very Edenic in a way. It's just very restorative and beautiful and pure in a way. It was, wow, it was stunning, narratively and visually. And I have to say, as someone who is generally very cynical about most fictional romances, I loved their relationship. And speaking of Casca, I really liked her, not just because she is a beast and I like my strong female characters, But her character and character development was compelling. For her to shift her infatuated focus of her godlike savior Griffith and combative jealousy of Guts to companionship and growing attraction to Guts was really cool. And for her to come to terms with her womanhood through her relationship with Guts was also satisfying. And props to Miura for including the bane of most women's existence, that physiological cycle of hormones and blood women universally loathe. I've never seen a woman suffering from symptoms like this in a manga before. Usually, manga women are like these mythical creatures with perpetually stable hormones and perpetually intact uterine linings. Like, you might see like comedic mentions of PMS or something in fiction, but you usually don't see women affected by these symptoms in a more realistic fashion. And so this was actually a breath of fresh air. And it was also narratively important, as Casca hiding her PMS symptoms despite the band's nonchalant acceptance of it seemed to be symbolic of her rejecting the weakness of her womanhood, as it would prevent her from fighting and winning the favor of her savior Griffith, at least until she feels more comfortable in her feminine vulnerability when she is by Guts' side. Oh, the writing is just too good. And it seemed to me, at least, after this point when the narrative reinforces her femininity, that she might be more sexualized in a more gratuitous and exploitative manner. To explain, she was violated on multiple occasions and was left with either torn strands of clothes or with nothing at all in the events leading to the eclipse and during the eclipse. Not to mention, the scene, despite depicting a very egregious, malicious, traumatizing violation, seemed not only prolonged, but it seemed to be framed in a way that meant to titillate instead of horrify. Just seems like Miura has depicted scenes like this in a more brutal and straightforward fashion, but this seemed to be almost evocative and sexy, which bothers me because rape is never sexy and should not be portrayed as anything that is sexy. Anyway, I was uncomfy, and both this and the scene involving the utterly disgusting, abysmal excuse for a package of human flesh left visual scars on my mind. Going forward, though, my other concern is that Casca, following this trauma, will remain only as a husk as her previously feisty, strong, robust self, and won't develop more as a character. It would be such a loss if she simply remained a victim and stagnated as a character. But those are my thoughts on Casca. Please let me know if you disagree or agree in the comments. And though this is a rather long arc, I thought it was paced extraordinarily well, and it was paced slowly enough for me to get emotionally invested in the members of the Band of the Hawk, and I really liked them a lot. So their demise during the eclipse was so heart-wrenching, and I have to say, Juno is my favorite side character in this series as of right now. Man, best boy Juno. Alright. Also, the politics within the Midland royalty and the tension that came with Griffith's pursuit of power was riveting, as was the slow unfolding of the supernatural forces, like the presence of the apostles, Nosferatu Zod, the Behemoth, or Beherit, and the tower before it all led to the eclipse. In fact, it was kind of surreal to follow humans gallivanting about and fighting other humans with minimal supernatural forces at hand, especially after the world in which in the first arc seemed to teem with these devilish critters and specters. And of course, the burning question, the mystery of why Griffith became Femto, never left my mind as I read it, which is why I think it is an act of brilliance on Miura's part to precede this section with the Black Swordsman arc. So this segues to the most compelling and despicable character in the series, the Birdman himself, the man who emanates childlike joy and menacing danger. Wow. This quote from Judo captures his essence so well. How can I put this? Just when you think it looks like he's got some strange wisdom, he seems just like a kid. When you think he has some spine-chilling look on his face, he smiles innocently, like a baby. Is he a child or an adult? A good guy or a villain? I don't really know what he is. I found myself captured by his charisma and his charm, even though I knew what he would become and what he'd do to Guts. But I found myself fascinated by him in spite of the underhanded and cruel things I saw he was doing. And as much as I abhor what he becomes and what he does, Griffith is such a fascinating, nuanced specimen of a character, and I just can't help but admire how Miura writes him, at least. Not to say I condone his evil actions or ambitions, but I love my complex characters. And as a leader driven by grandiose dreams, he possesses an almost obsessive desire for power and position, and that he's willing to stoop to manipulative and unscrupulous measures. Yet, he seems to harbor very genuine and passionate feelings for his crew, especially the newest member, Guts. And yes, I would argue that he genuinely cared about the band and doesn't just merely regard them as pawns. Otherwise, they would not meet the criteria to be branded as sacrifices. And at least earlier, he seems to lament the casualties of his pursuit of the dreams, while he reveals this to Casca, and then later on he asks Guts if he's cruel, so there must be some hint of remorse that he eventually squashes in order to obtain the dream. And I'd also argue that he values Guts emotionally and relationally instead of just viewing him as a tool. While Griffith certainly has always possessed darker elements of humanity, such as the capacity for cruelty, selfish possessiveness, and obsessive ambition, I would disagree with some people I've seen on the internet that say that he's a total sociopath. Sociopaths possess no capacity for empathy or regard for others, and I at least noticed too many instances of emotional vulnerability and emotion and a devotion to think that Griffith qualifies as one. At least from what I have seen, I would conclude that he is a normal human, psychologically, with an intact mind, that is simply given over to the darker impulses of human nature. Of course, this is prior to the rebirth, when he becomes a member of the God Hand and seems to be completely overwhelmed by evil. So in my estimation, he is a man of duality, in whom positive aspects of humanity and vulnerability seem to mingle with a fierce obsession and terrifying ruthlessness and selfishness that eventually take precedence as he chooses his dream over the one person who would challenge its place in its heart. Even though it was his dream itself that the Band of the Hawks pledged themselves to support, so a sense of duty to justify their devotion and deaths, while perhaps being retroactive self-justification in the eclipse, does add complexity to his motivation. Not saying I condone his decision to sacrifice them, but it is tragically ironic that his loyal band, who was willing to die for his dream and through regular human combat, found themselves unwillingly becoming sacrifices for that same dream through a nightmarish means they didn't expect. That trail of corpses was inevitable, but it's just not what any of them seemed to expect. But not to mention, the state that Griffith was in when he uses the behemoth, I expected him to be at a height of hubris, the zenith of power and ambition, when he makes a decision to become a member of the God Hand. I did not expect this emaciated and pitiful husk of a man. And he was at a rock bottom. So that's why I feel like some readers feel like his actions, pre-rebirth were justifiable to an extent. However, given what little we see of his facial reactions and attempts to take control or inflict harm, he still seems to retain that darkness of selfishness and bitterness despite being rescued. And I don't know, but what I can say is that Griffith's vicissitude of status lends to a very enticing complexity and frustrating complexity within my own heart, as I felt myself beguiled by his charms and intermittent cuteness, only to become viscerally revolted and shocked and terrified by him. Oh man, there is so much to say about this character. The more I think about him, the more I discover. And the same goes for the entirety of Berserk and Guts and Casca. There are just so many layers to all of these characters and just the plot as a whole. There are so many parallels and connections, such as those between Guts and Griffith, respectively as victim and seducer, if you will, of pedophiles. Guts and the first mercenary band versus Guts and the band of the Hawks. Casca and her relationship to both men. How Casca and Guts warmed each other's bodies in different instances, in pivotal instances. How Griffith seemed to intentionally inflict the same pain on Guts as he might have felt, hopelessly watching his comrades move on. And all of these things. And then, hold up, the fact that these two apostles were personally involved in the eclipse. Oh, and then not to mention Guts' own struggle versus Zod, and the scars of his trauma, and his changing dreams, and then the motifs of gods, devils, angels, and dreams, and the school night, and the lore surrounding him. Oh my gosh. And then Casca and her demon baby, who's apparently been that blob hanging around Guts. There's just so much to unpack here. And I have only read through this once, so I'm pretty certain I'm missing a few things. Even when revisiting like certain panels or pages, I have found that I found some details that I have missed. There is just so much going on, and I have to say, Miura is such a mad lad for creating and drawing this masterpiece so far. Oh, I am already blown away by the caliber of his writing, and just from what I've seen, I can see why he has left such an enduring legacy. Holy cow. So, with that said, those are my thoughts concerning Berserk so far. Well, not all of them. If I did, this video would be a lot longer than it is, and it's already very long. But in the comments below, please let me know if you agree, disagree, have other observations. It'd be nice to kind of just engage with the community about Berserk and just to hear from you. And it'd also help if you could like or subscribe. I hope to post videos on a more regular basis, and I will be posting another video about the Conviction arc, or at least the Lost Children chapter, in about a month if you would like to keep up with that. But with that, I thank you sincerely and hope that you find meaning in your pursuit of manga, anime, and happiness in life. I hope to see you in my next video.